Welcome to my new series, really designed. I want this whole thing to be a shift on how to live as a person who we just sort of, when you show up here, we presume you have probably some form of complex PTSD, especially from childhood. So CPTSD that I'm calling it. And we're going to just talk about how to live our lives. I felt like what I really want to do is share more and more content around, like, what could I have gone to back in the days when I was in that relationship with my partner, with my mom? Where would I go now? What are the things that still come up? And so we're just going to talk about those things. So I want this to be sort of a hub or a hive or a place you can go and, work on healing yourself in a way that it's just like how it shows up in your daily life. We have these big terms like depression, anxiety, CPTSD, but the truth is that all of those things play out in a million little moments and interactions and demands and relationships from ourselves and others. So today I want to talk about this term detachment. And I am going to rant a bit because I really feel like this is a BS term. It's like you can't talk about attachment on the one hand and how if you truly understand the science of attachment, that we're meant to be attached to others and then sit up on, a platform and talk about how, well, just detach yourself from the outcome. Just detach yourself and focus on yourself and let it go. And I mean, theoretically, yes, that's great, except for when we talk about the literature around what detachment means. And I know there are different spiritual philosophies and things that talk about detaching yourself from the outcome, which I do support. But I want to just get real about it and real about what you can do. Because the truth is that for many of us, we have our wounds in childhood. And detachment in the attachment dynamic is really what happened to the kids when initially we're talking about, let's say, research in the orphanages, where the child would first protest, right? So a child has been left, let's say, in an orphanage. First, they protest, they cry, they cling. You can imagine the image of a baby in the crib screaming, right? Get me out of here. I'm lonely, I'm sad, I'm scared. And when that didn't work, then the research says the next concept, according especially to Bowlby and to this film called A 2-Year-Old Goes to Hospital, where these concepts come from, the next thing is despair. So this is kind of what happens to us, right? Let's say we're not hearing back from somebody. We don't know how they feel about us. And so we feel really anxious. And this would also be especially true for those of us who have a more anxious or disorganized attachment system. But I will tell you that people that even have avoidant attachment systems, remember these are like patterns, not harsh categories. They feel anxious too when the other person, let's say if the other person becomes more avoidant, that can make them more anxious. So as human beings, we generally want to know where things are going. And we've attached a whole set of outcomes. You're going to heal my childhood. I'm not going to be lonely. I'm going to feel loved. I'm not going to have to take vacations alone. You're going to give me a baby or whatever that is, right? All kinds of things, a job, anything. And so, but what we're talking about though is that the idea of detachment, it comes from after we have the protest, the clinging, the crying, and after we have despair, true despair, then we can become indifferent. But the problem is when we're talking about in relationships, where I think most of us are talking about detaching from people more often than not, because even outcomes are often attached to the people, the success, the love, the whatever that thing is going to give us, like a job. Indifference was not a good thing in kids. No longer caring, no longer reaching or clinging or believing in human love and safety, and a mother, this is really the core of it, returning to the child in the research. Indifference in that regard is not a good thing. So there's a place, I think, for indifference where we can no longer feel, as I've talked about, emotionally connected to something or just consumed by it. And there can be a really good place for that where we release it. But when we're talking about detachment, let's say in romantic relationships especially, or attachment to the fantasy of the life. Let's say you're going through a divorce, for example, and you're still very attached, not necessarily to the partner, but to the idea of that partner, to the life you were going to have. Down the road, indifference and releasing that can be something. But to think that you can just walk around, to me, with indifference, and, especially when you want someone, for example, is complete and utter BS. It's a setup to failure. So, like I was saying, I want to hold the space for indifference in a way that frees you and says, I can be okay without you. And indifference, where you literally let go of the love, the passion, the whatever you feel inside for something, and you feel almost numb and dead inside. That's a different thing. And I think we get confused. And so I wanted to share what I think is when we're talking about detaching and how it can set us free. Let's talk about it in an example really first of a romantic relationship where, you're not sure how someone feels about you. And you've attached all these outcomes to the life this person is going to give you. Like I said, the things are going to heal. What's important, I think, is to create, and this is what the literature talks about, is when these kids, let's say in the attachment experience, the experiments, when they could attach to another mother, let's say they were adopted, the memory of the mother, there was some connection to keeping her alive. When they had some attachment to an alternative mother, and I would say alternative other, they were much better able to not get stuck in that shutdown, collapsed, because indifference can look like true depression, where you don't care about yourself or anyone or anything because there's such a depletion of energy and wound inside, obviously mental health, imbalance, whatever that is. And we don't necessarily want that. I don't think that's the answer to just stopping caring. I think at the same time, many of us care too much, and that's what we're talking about. So the first thing is, if you want to work on this, is to understand that the deprivation, and that's the part. So there was the clinging, the deprivation of the mother is where the despair and where the indifference, the true heartbreaking indifference, comes in. And it's the deprivation for yourself of somebody, something that hurts so much. Like, you feel deprived, right? It's like, don't you love me back? Why can't you text me back? Or why don't you want me in this job? Like, we feel deprived of some value. And even in this research, they talk about primary affect hunger, which is rather a full spectrum of human feelings, even including hostility, that arises from a daily interaction with a mother. So basically, when you deprive someone of any connection, you're depriving them of the range of experience, all of it, the frustration, the love, the laughter, the sadness, the fear, all of that. And we need all of that. So instead of trying to tell yourself, just be this independent, don't care about anything person, I'd like to suggest the idea of creating in its place an alternative mother or other for yourself. So that what you're doing is you are not letting go and not caring. You are instead leaning in to create this alternative other for yourself. I think that's much more, it's much more identifiable to think about creating an internalized remothering, refathering, reparenting, internalized loving other instead. And that way you're not setting yourself up like, why can't I just stop caring? Why do I care? You care because you care. You care because we're wired to care. So the first thing is to identify what is happening for you. So this is a great place to have a journal or to put down notes. Identify your response that you're having. So let's say they're not texting me back. I'm feeling panicked. I'm feeling rejected. I'm feeling scared. And why becoming an alternative mother or other is important. So if I could instead not be so focused on all those rejecting feelings, I could instead nurture and love and have compassion and support for myself if I could create some other version of this alternative mother or other inside. You want to talk to yourself about, why is this hurting me? And what is it doing to me? And oftentimes when we're staying focused on trying to control others or figure out why they're not responding or what's wrong with us, it's keeping the deprivation alive. It's reminding us of all the things that we don't have, and it's actually taking up space in our brain where we're hyper-focusing on the other person, the other outcome, and not on creating an other for ourselves or an alternative mother. So write that out. Write out, what are you wanting to control? What assurances are you trying to get for yourself? Are they assurances that if this person loves me back, I will end up dying alone, I will finally have a child? There are other ways to have a child without a partner. There are. There are ways to build a life without somebody. Like when you attach everything to the other person, it makes all of that relationship become so much more powerful and what they can take from you. So if I've attached that if this person doesn't like me back, I'll never have a family, I'll never have a home, I'll never live the life I want, I'm giving them all of a story that is not accurate, that I can create for myself. So it's about pivoting inward towards yourself and leaning in and creating that. And so looking at, what am I telling myself? How can I work on creating this other inside? And the way this pays off is through doing things that actually help you set up this other in your life. So you decide what your boundaries are. Like, I will not text this person. I will not repeatedly text this person. I will not engage with them in an intimate way, like whatever it is. Or you set up boundaries, like you're really clear about what is okay and what is not. I will respond under these circumstances. If they, leave me on red 3 times, I'm out. Like trying to get clear, or I will clarify and I will lean in and ask the person, hey, I thought we had a connection. It seemed like things were going well. I haven't really heard from you. And I just like to check in and kind of see what your thoughts are about what what you might be thinking about our intentions for this relationship. And if they say, or they don't respond at all, they ghost you, or they say, you know what, I'm glad you asked. I think you're a great person, but I just don't think we're a good fit. Great, thank you. Next, then you move on. So maybe part of your boundaries are to set up communication patterns from your perspective. The next thing is to look at the story, like I'm saying, that you've created. So the problem is you've created an entire outcome from trying to control this thing you're trying to detach from, or you'd like to detach from. So now, like I'm saying, you're like, oh, well, if they respond, I won't be lonely anymore, blah, blah, blah. And you have to get really clear that it's often more about that than the person. Because nobody wants to be in a job, in a relationship, in a situation where they don't feel at some point reciprocity. And part of our childhood trauma and CPTSD is that we didn't often get reciprocity. And so we don't even know to expect it or demand it, or we're so deprived, we're longing for it, and we're putting this expectation on everything and everyone. So that's where we want to work on. So detaching is, to set up this alternative mother way in your life or other, where you focus on, instead of hyper-focusing whenever you start to obsess over the text, let's say, or the outcome, you literally get up and exercise. You meditate. You try to observe what's happening for you. You go for a walk. You literally make yourself engage in a hobby. Part of what we're doing is distracting our brain to get our brain off that hyper-focus into something else that serves our body. So exercise actually serves your body in a lot of ways. We all know that. I don't have to go into the research. You feel better, and I know you feel better if you are able, of course, to move your body in some way. Maybe all you can do is move your mind if you have a disability, but the point is to redirect your mind and body. Journal. Write in the journal everything you'd like to say, all the things you want to do, but you're not going to do. Write to yourself with compassion in your journal about why it's so hard to not keep texting them, or why it hurts so bad, and what kind of love you deserve inside, that it's okay that you feel that way, but that you're not going to follow through on those things. It's like I said before, set strong boundaries. I will not text them under these circumstances. I will not use substances and reach out. I will hide my phone. If you are trying to detach from somebody and you end up having a connection with them in some way, some emotional charge, let's say it's a breakup and you're trying to move on. I firmly believe you cannot be new BFFs the minute you break up. For most people, there needs to be a period there where you honor what you're feeling and you set your boundaries and you reflect and understand what happened. And every time you get that little bit of hit from them, we can get stuck in that like obsessive love that we can't let go of. We can get stuck in the old patterns of love that we thought they were going to heal. So really firm boundaries around communication, intimacy, emotional connection, if you get any kind of charge or support in any way from them, and you are the one that can't detach, you have to figure out how to stop doing that. Now, if you're detached from them and you truly have indifference, great. But maybe what you need to be careful of is not reinforcing this other person who still cares for you, who's still emotionally attached to you, who is still getting some hit from you. It is also, I believe, your job to not reinforce that and encourage that if you are aware that that is happening. You can say it verbally, you can set the boundary, but like, you are responsible in some way, and you can't just, keep getting your ego filled in some way by knowing that they still love you, and so you reach out when you're lonely, for example, right? So have a good sense of respect and love for yourself and for the other person, especially if you do and did once care for them. Understand that tolerating uncertainty is the heart of this, that the anxiety of not being able to control and predict the outcome is what makes you want to I'm just going to detach. But the problem is the anxiety, the uncertainty is often still there. And that's why I think the detachment videos are often BS, because they're telling you to go do something else, to not care anymore, to go be an independent, woman, which I'm all about. But they don't talk about what's happening inside and how difficult that is, and how we have to work on understanding that there's an outcome in our mind to that we're attached to. So learning to tolerate feelings of uncertainty and anxiety is a difficult thing to do. And that's why going back to exercise, hobbies, reframing in your mind, the thoughts, the patterns, moving your body can help. I'm not suggesting that doing all those things will just remove that obsessive, often thinking about, oh, why am I so attached to the outcome? And I've got to stop caring. I just need to move on. It's a full space of honoring those feelings. Obviously, things like therapy can be incredibly powerful and important. And understanding that oftentimes what you're really attached to, that you're trying to detach from, like I said in the beginning, is some fantasy, some outcome, some story, some narrative that you've created. And it may be that there are some parts of that story that you need to give yourself. It just may be. It may be that if you are, let's say, wanting, like I said, a child, and this is not up for debate, so of course I believe that any child in a loving family system with more than one person is an ideal thing, but not always possible. And so if it's having a child, if it's having a partner, if it's traveling, there are some parts of that story you may need to figure out on your own in the interim, or to maybe get clear with, do you really want those things, right? That maybe that you don't. But whatever it is, you have to lean inward. And I think that is the thing that's important. It's like, it's not just so simple as no longer letting yourself care, because true indifference cannot be repaired. When we think about attachment, the true indifference these children had was a shutdown of their attachment needs, and actually a deactivation, which if we look at, like, let's say, avoidant attachment in the extreme, was these kids saying, like, I'm not going to attach to anyone anymore. And then I'm going to go out in the world and I'm going to reenact that childhood where I let people in just enough, but that I never really let myself be close and safe because I was deprived, I was in despair, and I stopped caring and trying. And that is not the best outcome. That can be the best outcome when it's like detaching from grief, your divorce, whatever it is, a loss. Maybe it's a field in life that you thought you were going to follow. So, wounding from parents, like, there's a place for you to truly become indifferent and not to be so still connected emotionally. That is a good thing. But when it comes to people and relationships, we don't want you to become so shut down and detached that you detach them from yourself. And that's what I'm suggesting, that it's important for you to be realistic with yourself. And I think this idea of leaning in and creating an alternative other, instead of telling yourself to shut down and not care and do your own thing, like, if that works for you, great. But you don't want to shut off your heart completely. There are places to shut off our heart and places to learn to put our heart on hold, to tolerate the space, to create love for ourselves. But if we're talking about attachment, we know that the whole concept is that we need other people, that we are not actually islands unto ourselves. But I would argue, and this is true for me, for many of us, we literally detached from human connection because it wasn't safe permanently. And then every relationship you go into afterwards, you never let yourself fully be. And I think there's a part of that that's somewhat normal. It's like I truly believe that your first love, there's nothing like your first love before it ends and you get hurt, because it's so pure. You don't yet have that guard up. And so a little bit of guard, I think, is probably a good thing, right? We can't just be these like open books of vulnerability with no boundaries and just openness. There's a beauty to that and purity to that, but that's also why it's often devastating. And we often hold a space in our first loves that no one else quite fills. But there's also a place to have a little bit of guardrails, to try to be, loving and mindful of boundaries, but to also hold yourself in high enough regard that you start to understand that you are worthy of this person responding. And that's the core. Detaching, where you are finding love and value and mothering in yourself, that it becomes who you are, not a strategy to buy time and to appear detached and to appear independent until that person, that thing, that job suddenly realizes what they've lost or how they have to try harder, or you've somehow tricked them. It's not about that. It's about you in all the cases, whether it's indifference from a parent's hurts or a relationship, that you lean in and lovingly create and find value in attaching to yourself and creating healing spaces in place of expecting someone else to just give those to you when they're not able to, because oftentimes people can be very healing. That's the whole point of attachment. There's a lot of love and healing to happen in relationship. So I just want to say that, because I feel like I watch these videos and I'm like, this is like everything I've read on 50 different Pinterest cards, like just love yourself and be a girl boss or whatever. I agree with all those things. But the reality is, I think it's a setup to be like, just be indifferent, detach, and be cool, don't care, great. But if you are so good at doing that and turning that off and on, there's a very good chance that you've detached from the idea of love and connection altogether. And we don't want that, because what we want to presume is that for the people in your life, children, partners, friends, that you want to let love in, that you have the ability to do that because you know how to create that space, not just within yourself, but you've still held space that people can be safe and loving as well, which I know is scary when you have childhood trauma. This whole concept makes it even harder if you had a difficult childhood. But I think it's important. So thanks for being here. Please stay safe and well. And we're going to talk tomorrow about being told you were selfish in your childhood and understanding what selfishness is and how to be more self-focused on yourself, but how to also identify, are you selfish or is someone else selfish? Because we know that many of us with childhood trauma, we tend to attract those who can be really hurtful if we had hurtful, models in our life and our parents. So thanks for being here. I will see you tomorrow. Please stay safe and well and take good care. Okay, bye.